Hello, today we are going to discuss the liberalization, privatization, and globalization. We know the economy, what it is today in India, was not same earlier in 1991. The Indian economy has gone fundamental changes since 1991. A series of reform was brought in 1991, which changed the Indian economy in drastic manner and in a fundamental ways. Now let's see the causes of the liberalization, privatization, and globalization. There has to be causes for anything to happen. For example, for creation of a universe, Big Bang happened. That was the cause for the creation of universe. For the same thing, for happening of LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization, there are certain reasons. There were some conditions, peculiar condition available in our country at that point of time, and there were several reasons like poor performance of public sector. The public sector was not performing, its performance was unsatisfactory. Jawaharlal Nehru introduced the socialist form of economy, which promoted the public sector units on larger scale, but after some point of time it was seen that the public sector units were not performing up to the expectation. So the performance of public sector units was not satisfactory. The inflationary pressure was high at that point of time because the cost pull inflation, we know because of the war between Iraq and Kuwait, the oil prices increased and it led to the cost pull inflation. The rise of fiscal deficit increased. The fiscal deficit increased to more than 10%, and we know that when the fiscal deficit increases, it causes its impact is seen in many sectors and many areas. Huge burden of tax. The public were burdened with huge amount of tax. The forex reserve fall. We were left with only 2 weeks of forex reserve to buy the essential goods and import of the services, paying the interest to the foreign on the foreign debt. So balance of payment crisis happened. So this all led to the circumstances which caused the introduction of LPG, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. In these circumstances, India went to IMF, and we know that for going to IMF or World Bank, there are two different circumstances. The circumstances are to, like, for good reasons, the country normally go to World Bank, like for school, hospital, infrastructure, and railways, for developing, for poverty alleviation. For all these reasons, the countries normally go to World Bank. But for going to IMF, the countries normally go to IMF in bad situation. The countries go to IMF. So, but when India went to IMF has put forwarded the certain conditions, the way we see in villages, like in earlier days, जब लोगों के पास दिक्कत होती थी, लोग महाजन के पास जाते थे, और महाजन के पास जब जाते थे बोलते थे कि साहब हमको पैसा चाहिए, तो महाजन बोलता था पैसे तो मिल जाएंगे, लेकिन आपको इसके बदले में पेपर जमा करने होंगे, और उस पेपर को एक्सप्लॉइट करता था, उनकी ज़मीन को हड़प लेता था. Same thing did not happen with IMF, but similar condition was put forwarded by IMF, and that condition was that India was a closed economy that point of time. It was closed economy. It was almost cut to outside world. Then IMF said that you will have to open your economy, liberalize your economy, increase the foreign investment in your country, devalue your currency. And this concept of IMF came from the Washington Consensus. This is very important. Washington Consensus in 1989. According to this, developed country or IMF decided that the developing countries should open their economy more to the world, so that the investment flow of investment can be done. So in these circumstances, and because of this, IMF had given some certain condition, put forward a certain condition, which was although harsh, but later on it proved to be good for Indian economy. And one more thing is there, the IMF gives loan to the countries which are in crisis in form of EFF, extended fund facility. It means under this the countries get loan from IMF when they are in crisis. So this is how India went to IMF, and IMF had certain condition. India had no option but to accept that conditions, because India was having a deep crisis, balance of payment crisis, which was the urgent emergency for India to bail out this country from the economic crisis. Now let's see the new economic policy. New economic policy was introduced, and the immediate objective was the short term, which is forex issue, inflation; long term issue, structural reform, efficiency, international competitiveness was the objective. Both short term and long term objectives were there before India while introducing the new economic policy. Now let's see one by one the liberalization, privatization and globalization. What is liberalization? Liberalization means liberalizing the economy, smoothing the restriction, deregulation of government rules, giving more freedom to the private company to perform, and dilution of monopolies, Restrictive Trade Practices Act (MRTP), which was strict measures taken by the government for the entrance into the PSU, into the industry. Generally no other companies were allowed to get into the industry because of this MRTP. So this was diluted. The objective was to unlock the economic potential, introduce the competitiveness, and we know that earlier we were having BSNL, and thereafter there was a lots of issues faced by the public while going to the BSNL, because the competition was not there, modernization was not there, and we know after that many other telecom companies like Airtel came. So liberalization is basically liberalizing the economy. We can understand this concept from the history, like in modern history we see we had the moderate and the extremists. The moderates were more liberalized in their policies, in their ideologies, unlike the extremists. So in economic terms, the same concept is applied, that Indian government became more liberalized and they introduced the liberalization policy. It is said that Indian economy was unfit that point of time, so make it fit. The FIT scheme was brought, FIT, and there are 5 subheads under FIT. First is financial sector reform, second foreign exchange reform, industrial sector reform, tax reform, trade and investment reform. We will see each of them in detail. Financial sector reform. Under financial sector reform, the role of RBI was changed from regulator to facilitator. Origin of private banks happened. Both foreign and the domestic banks were allowed to enter. New banks were opened. Increase in the limit of foreign investment were done. is in the expansion of the branches were done. So in this way financial sector reform was brought up. Next is foreign exchange is a reform. Foreign exchange, the currency was devalued up to 22%, and this was the condition of IMF also, that you will have to devalue your currency, and this was based on the market exchange rate, based on the demand and supply. The currency, whenever the currency is there are two ways when currency depreciate. First, when the government depreciates, it's called devaluation. So India devalued the currency up to 22%, and when it happened on the basis of market factor, it is called depreciation. So devaluation was done up to 22% under foreign sector reform. Under the foreign exchange reform, thereafter industrial sector reform was introduced. This is also another very important segment of the liberalization. Under this, the PSU role of PSU were reduced from 17 to 3 PSUs. I mean, earlier there were 17 PSUs reserved for the government companies. Later on, it reduced to 3. Only 3 were reserved for the sectors like cigarette, liquor, explosive, and the strategic or security purpose. Few areas were reserved. Then the license the license Raj was scrapped because of the industrial sector reform. Deregulation of small scale industries were brought. The monopolies, restrictive trade practices was scrapped. Freedom to import the capital goods like machinery was allowed under the industrial sector reform. Thereafter, tax reform was brought. Under tax reform, the simplification of taxation was done. The import duty was reduced from 130% to 30%. The excise duty was increased by 20%. These were also the conditions of IMF, that you will have to increase the excise duty and decrease the import. Excise duty was increased because to neutralize the revenue deficit which was done while decreasing the import duty. Simplification process was done in taxation, in both direct and indirect taxation. We know today we are having GST, one nation, one tax. So it is another form of simplification. Then the trade and investment reform was brought. Under this, the restriction was removed, export duty was scrapped, the reduction in import duty, the import license was deregularized. So in this way the economic liberalization was done under FFIT, that is FIT. Now moving to the another areas, that is privatization. Today we see that private sector is present everywhere in almost all the sectors, and people prefer more to going towards the private companies, like for taking the services. We all are having the mobile phones, we use Jio, Airtel, the infrastructure services we use the private company, the private companies facilities more. Similarly, in banking, we prefer to take the services from the banks which are privatized because best services are given there. So the privatization, the objective was to decrease the role of PSU and increase the role of private sector. How the privatization is done? The privatization is done by in two ways. First is through transferring the ownership. Complete ownership is transferred under under the privatization. Another way is the disinvestment. The disinvestment is done. Some shares, equity shares, are sold from the government companies to the private companies. In this way, the privatization happens. What is the need of privatization? The question is why the privatization is important, and why it was important at point of time. What was the need of introducing the private sector? It was because we have already discussed the performance of PSU was not satisfactory. There were lots of inefficiency, corruption in the performance of PSUs. The diversification of industries were needed, more energies, more vigor was needed at that point of time, because the PSUs were performing in a lethargic way. Indian economy was going through another reason for which the privatization was brought was Indian economy was going through the structural transformation from the agricultural base to the industrial base. More and more people were moving from agricultural base to the industries for their livelihood, and this required the systematic change. For this also, those people who are moving from agriculture to industries, they needed job. So to accommodate them, the privatization was required. So in this way, the privatization was introduced. What are the benefits of privatization? Privatization brings the competitiveness, modernization. The financial discipline is brought through the privatization. Diversification of the product is brought. Privatization promotes the consumer sovereignty. Consumer sovereignty means when consumers are having more choice, they are having the good quality and more choices to buy certain goods. That is called consumer sovereignty, is promoted through the privatization. But there are certain demerits of privatization as well. The demerits are inequality. Because of the privatization, inequality have increased. Those who are having wealth, their wealth are increasing, and those who are not having wealth, their wealth, the inequality have increased. Because of this, the deprivation, the poor have not received the real benefit of the privatization. So these are some demerits of privatization. Now let's see the globalization. What is globalization? Globalization is nothing but to link one's economy to the global economy. It is the way in which we interlink or interconnect our economy with the other part of the world. That is the globalization. In another way, we can understand globalization with the recent example, the COVID. We know that the COVID virus began in China, but it is spread throughout the world within months. It is because of the globalization, because the transportation facilities have increased, the speed of the transportation have increased, and this has created the global village today. So the aim of the globalization is to have a borderless world. Borderless world does not mean losing the sovereignty. It means reducing the trade barriers, transform the world towards more interdependence, integration, creating network transcending the economic and geographical boundaries. These are the aim of globalization. Policies to promote the globalization. What are the policies through which globalization was promoted at point of time? The equity of the foreign investment was increased. Partial convertibility was introduced at that point of time, means selling or purchasing of foreign exchange at market price. The reduction in tariff was done. The import duty was reduced to 30% from 130%. So these are the policies to promote the globalization. What were the impact of globalization? We know the globalization, there are many benefits of globalization. Among them, First is the transfer of technology. The technology is transferred from the developed countries to the developing countries. The capital is transferred. Thereafter, the transfer of labor happens in globalization. So, but the developed countries do not accept the transfer of labor, they accept the transfer of technology, transfer of capital, trade in globalization. The positive impact of globalization. Globalization has created many positive impacts. Because of globalization, we know today we are having many companies which are established in India. Earlier there was Maruti, Suzuki that came to India. Thereafter Hero plus Honda came. So there was the company worked in a joint manner. The share was like 51% and 49%. In this way, the working in a joint manner took place at that point of time. Today we are having the Google, Facebook, the YouTube is there. We are using the Samsung phone. All is happening because of the globalization. The companies from India are going outside this country, like in US and in many other countries, to do the business. For example, the presence of MDH is in more than 50 countries. So this has become possible because of the globalization. Apart from the positive impact, there are some negative impact as well, like the globalization has benefited more the developed countries than the developing countries. It has created the inequality between the nations and the people. Now, this was all about the globalization. Now let's see the arguments in favor of NEP. We know that every coin has two sides. So the new economic policy has also positive and negative impact on the Indian economy. The Indian economy benefited to larger extent from the NEP, new economic policy. The GDP increased. Earlier the GDP was 1.1%. Thereafter it increased to 6% and remained up to 6% for many number of years. The inflow of foreign investment increased because of the new economic policy. It is $444 billion investment came between 2014 to 2019. So this was the huge investment of foreign investment took place in India. The rise in, thereafter we have the rise in export. The export increased. Earlier the trade was only 42 billion. After the introduction of new economic policy, the trade increased to 762 billion. The inflation control, earlier the inflation was 13.9%. After introduction of new economic policy, the inflation moderated. Thereafter we have control inflation. Export has increased. The increasing private sector, the private sector's presence is everywhere today. The consumer sovereignty has increased. Today the consumer have more choice to buy the goods, and they have choice to get the quality of goods. The foreign exchange reserve have increased. Today the foreign exchange reserve is more than 600 billion. Earlier it was not, our foreign exchange reserve was not enough for even 2 weeks to buy the essential goods, import the services, pay for the services and pay for the interest or debt, foreign debt. So these are the arguments in favor of new economic policy. Now let's see the argument against the NEP. Neglect of agriculture. Because of the new economic policy, the more focus was on industries. Industries were more focused, and agriculture by and large got neglected because of new economic policy. Unbalanced growth took place. We know that today there is a huge disparity between the regions, urban and rural areas. Few areas, few regions are very flourished, like Gujarat, Maharashtra are flourished. Then the states like Bihar, UP, Jharkhand are not much flourished. So unbalanced growth have taken place. Lack of infrastructure have facilities are there, because the focused have not been much on the power sector, because investment was lacking. Non-tariff barriers by the developed countries. The developed countries has, as we have already discussed, that the globalization have benefited more the developed countries than the developing countries, because of the non-tariff barriers by them. Ineffective disinvestment policies. The disinvestment policies have become ineffective by and large, because the value of PSU have been devalued, and because of that it has become ineffective. Thereafter, we have cultural erosion. The cultural erosion have taken place. More and more people are more confident, and they feel proud of following the Western footstep than our own. They following our own culture. So it is leading towards the erosion of our culture. The spread of consumerism is happening. The consumerism is leading towards the materialism, the luxurious life, and this is eroding the environmental. This is leading to the environmental degradation. Unbalanced growth have happened. We know today 10% of the people holds more than 50% of the wealth in India. So huge unbalanced inequality has created because of new economic policy. But we can say that overall the new economic policy have benefited Indian economy, although there has been some negative impact which the government is dealing with them today to come out of those negative impact. Now let's see some previous year question related to the liberalization, privatization and globalization. The question is, with reference to the Indian economy, after the 1991 economic liberalization, consider the following statement. The worker productivity rupees per worker at 2004-5 prices increased in urban areas while it decreased in rural areas. But as per the second is, the percentage share of rural areas in the workforce steadily increased. The rural area. Third is the rural areas, the growth in rural areas, the growth in the non-farm economy increased. Fourth is the growth rate in the rural employment decreased. And then the statements, which of the statement is correct? So here the first statement, the statements third and fourth are right, and the first and second is wrong, because as per Niti Aayog, the worker productivity has increased in both urban and rural areas. The statement second is also wrong, because the percentage of share in rural areas, workforce has increased, but it has decreased because of the transition, because of the migration from the rural to urban areas. The statement 3 is right. The growth in the non-farm economy has increased. Yes, it has increased because the non-farm sector has increased to 4.56%, and in value it is 41 million employment was done. the fourth statement is correct because the growth rate in rural employment has decreased because of the transition, because of the urbanization. People transition from the rural to urban areas. Now let's see a question on mains. How globalization has led to the reduction of employment in formal sector of Indian economy? Is increased informalization detrimental to the development of the country? So how globalization has led to the reduction in employment? The employment has increased and it has reduced, has decreased also because of the several reasons. The competition from the foreign goods increase, the foreign goods, the produce the products at lower prices, and because of that the companies which were present in India, they could not compete with those companies which were from the foreign countries, and because of that the unemployment created. The shift of flexible employment happened. We know the gig economy, where the contractual work is happening, part-time employment, temporary work position is there. Because of that the shift towards flexible employment has happened, and it has affected the employment in formal sector. Automation and technological advancement has happened. Because of that those people who are employed in formal sectors, because of that, because of technology, they got displaced and they got unemployed. The second part of the question is increased informalization detrimental to the development of the country? Yes, it is detrimental to the development of the country, because informalization leads to lack of social security, the lack of retirement plan, insurance, unemployment benefit. Lack of unemployment benefit is there. Another is the lack of skill development. The informal sector lack the capital investment, and because of that the skill development does not happen. The weak labor standard and exploitation, the informal sector are more exposed to the exploitation. The income inequality and poverty is happening because of the informalization of the Indian economy. So we can say that because of informalization the detrimental impact is there on the Indian economy. On the other hand, the information has also benefited some way by through the jobs. Many people are employed, the self-employed, and they are gaining their livelihood. But by and large, because in India we are having a large workforce, and because of that, because of the informalization, the workforce has got affected. So this was all about the liberalization, privatization and globalization. Thank you very much.